And we're live. Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for our Spark session on Boys Talk 2. My name is Connor Warren, and I am the CEO of Spark UK, and I'm honoured to be joined by some incredible guests today. So if you would all like to introduce yourselves, Ben, would you like to go first?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. My name's Ben. I'm a mental health campaigner. And so what that means is I essentially try and push the government to do better when it comes to mental health. So better education, better healthcare through the NHS. And that's what I do day to day. So I spend a lot of time in Parliament with trying to persuade decision makers to think differently about mental health.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And Shoko, would you like to go next?
Yes, I'm a rapper first. I got my name shock. I'm a rapper first. Author, became a new author in 2023. So I think it's been like 2 years now. And I'm a mental health advocate. And what that means, I like the fact you said that, Ben. You elaborated on what that means because I never go into what it means. But a mental health advocate for me, I don't know I know it's a completely different meaning on paper, but for me, it's someone that uses their story to shine a light for other
Mm.
people. And that's generally what I do is use my journey to shine a light for others.
Amazing. That's brilliant. And Sean?
Yes, no. I think I'm someone who describes themselves as a mental health advocate as well. I speak on the lived experience of neurodiversity and OCD, obviously, in particular, is something I'm keenly passionate about, raising awareness and really changing the pervasive stereotypes on what OCD is or neurodiversity. I spend a lot of time working in corporations and schools, colleges, universities to build programs and to embed policies that leave the world in a better place than I found it. And I think similar to what Shoka said, I believe the power of a lived experience is a way to show people that recovery, most importantly, is possible.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's great having you all, and this is going to be a super exciting conversation. To give a bit of context, Spark UK, we are a youth-led mental health organisation based here in the UK, and we support hundreds of schools around the UK. And this year, we were looking at topics in which we felt were really important for young people, especially around the concept of mental well-being. And one of the biggest topics that came out was around masculinity and around men's mental health. Obviously, this year it's been something that's been spoken about hugely across the media, especially with the Netflix show Adolescence coming out, as well as social media influencers and the broad context of the digital landscape. So yeah, men's mental health has been something that's been really important and really spoken about this year more than ever. And it's been great to have these three join us to talk about this very important conversation. So I'm going to go straight in to the first big question. So when you hear the phrase "boys talk to," what comes to mind for each of you? And I will start with you, Ben.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Big question. So I would say, from my point of view, so the reason I got into mental health campaign, the reason I do the work I do now is because, very sadly, I lost my younger brother Sam to suicide when we were both at school, and I think quite commonly we look at men's mental health and we talk about boys, and we say that they don't talk, or that mental health isn't something that we're very good at dealing with. But actually, when you look at what happened to Sam, my brother, he did talk to a lot of people. He told people what was going on, and he found that it wasn't always received in the right way, or support wasn't there when he did talk about things. So I think what it means to me is that actually it is fact. Boys do talk too. We talk in our own way. Sometimes we talk in a language that isn't sort of recognized as a way of talking about emotions, but I think we still talk about it. If you actually sit down and listen to a group of boys talking, and I go into schools quite a lot and I sit down with the lads and you like listen to what they're saying, and they are talking about big things. They do talk about big things, but they do it through a language that traditionally, like psychologists, psychiatrists don't necessarily think is the conversation we should be having. So I think we've got to give a little bit more respect to boys, and instead of trying to force them to talk in a way that we want them to talk in, we've actually got to sort of understand that it is a different language sometimes that they're using, and we've got to just make sure that services and support is available for that situation, and ready when they talk about it through their own way, rather than basically being like, you need to talk about mental health, let's have a conversation about well-being, which, that is not as accessible as talking about, I don't know, like talking about mental health through physical fitness. So, having a conversation about how you can improve your sort of fitness and ability through actually talking about some of the stresses. Because if you reduce your stress psychologically, you can also reduce your stress physiologically, so you can perform better. And so those are some ways that we can just change the sort of conversation. But in my work, like, I try to reject the idea that boys don't talk, because I see and hear boys talking all the time, and it's a bit of a misconception, I think, in the media. Not always, but I think largely it's slightly misunderstood.
I
Amazing.
agree. I agree with every word. And I think boys talk too, when I think of it, it's like society forget that boys and men share the same emotions that everybody else shares. But it's like, we get painted that we're superheroes and we don't feel these things, but we feel the exact same emotions, if not more. And what I agreed with what Ben said is about the language. I feel like men, what we're doing now, how we're communicating now, is the hardest form of communication. Being vulnerable and having a conversation like this is so difficult. We make it look easy because this is like, basically our skill and what we do. But it's so difficult. Like, I know, like, Ben and probably Sean can relate because you've got partners. But do you know how difficult it is to turn to your partner and say certain things, or say certain things to your friends and certain things to your parents? I remember, obviously, my mum passed in 2022 from cancer, and I had so much questions I wanted to ask her that I haven't had a chance, that I never got a chance to ask her, but I couldn't bring myself to even articulate it and have that conversation. So the language we communicate as men is completely different, and sometimes we use different forms to communicate too. So it's like, for me, I use my art form. So when you hear my albums, my friends laugh all the time and say, "Do you know what, Shocks? We're not even going to ask you what's going on in your world. We're just going to wait till your album comes out," because they know I'm going to pour everything into my album. Do you know what I mean? Some people pour it into their drawing, their journals. The last place they think of pouring it into is a conversation like this. Because a conversation like this, you don't know what the other person's thinking, if they're judging you, if they're laughing at you behind your back. So, like, there's all of those worries. And a lot of men have had very terrible experiences. I saw a post on Instagram 2 days ago about this guy that came home from work, and for the first time he came home looking a bit sad, and his wife asked him why is he sad, and he explained why he's sad, because, like, there's a lot of stuff going on at work and stuff, and he kind of cried because he was emotional about it. And she said that just seeing him cry, as much as she knew he was being genuine, but she lost all respect for him. Do you know what I mean? So imagine how much men go through that on a day-to-day basis, and probably swear to themselves they will never ever be vulnerable ever again. And that's how we ended up in this situation that we're in.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. Sean, do you have anything you wanted to add?
Yes, absolutely. I can only reiterate what Ben and Shocker have said. Boys do talk, but I often have said to people, especially in the work that I do, just because boys don't speak in a language you can't understand doesn't mean they don't speak at all. And I love to use archetypes or narratives. I'm a big narrative fan. Like, I love psychology, I love neuroscience, philosophy, and fiction. And I think if I use two direct examples, if you know about Thanos in the Marvel universe, Thanos is a great example of a man who wants control and believes he's doing something for the greater good in society. Whereas if you use the Joker as a prime example, as the antithesis to Batman, the Joker wants to watch the world burn because he's not seen by anyone, he's not noticed. So he says to people, "I will burn the world in order to feel its warmth, and I will show the world what happens when you don't notice me and you don't take care of me." And I love to use that to really juxtapose that relationship, that both of these individuals talk, but they speak in the echoes of destruction. And quite often for a lot of men, they would rather see the world burn for people to finally notice them, because when they did speak to people in other ways, as Shocker said, they're not respected, they're laughed at, they're mocked in so many different ways. And we know, for example, in schools, boys do talk. They may talk through destructive means. They may speak through actually not saying anything, because inaction is a form of action, and it's a language, even
Definitely.
and I think even if in that limited capacity, the world has to understand men do talk, absolutely, and boys do talk. But it's about whether you've got the ears to listen to them, and whether you can actually hear them in a non-judgmental space. So when I go into schools, I often ask schools, do I have a true license to hear what these boys have to say? Or do I have the license to say everything I want to say in a bid to connect with these young men?
Absolutely. I echo everything you all have just said. And I think, as you said, boys do talk, but they don't necessarily use words to talk. They use everything other than words a lot of the time. And equally, when they do use words, they might not be saying it exactly. They may be using other things to describe how they're feeling, using stories, using art, any different way they can to sort of really showcase how they feel. And I left secondary school about 3 years ago, and going through that, I know,
Wow, that's the other day.
Yeah, and actually,
I feel like I was in secondary school, like in the Viking days. That's how long ago it was. That's crazy.
For me, it does feel a long time ago. So, but the world changes so quickly, and especially sort of being in that circumstance. And I was in secondary school during COVID, and that's
oh my god,
insane thing of like mental health wasn't really spoken about that much before COVID. And then we saw this rapid thing in lockdown of all of a sudden everybody talking about it. And this is where sort of all of our journeys really began, I would say.
Yes, no, it's true.
And yeah, it was really challenging being at that forefront of actually being in school, but equally talking about mental health and being one of the only people in my school that actually understood what mental health was. And I think there is still such a stigma around it. And
sorry to cut you, but the world making that shift into everyone having a conversation about mental health, I don't think they realize, I don't know if we're really judging the progress that's been made, but I don't think they've realized how easier it made it to have certain conversations, especially for me, because I never spoke about my sexual experience in depth prior to that. But when the world kind of shifted and started having that conversation, it was so like my friends started asking me questions. Do you know what I mean? Like, oh, wait, what happened? Like, do you know what I mean? And I got a chance to have that conversation. So, because we never talk about the progress that's been made. We always talk about how bad it's been going. And I did an interview with One Extra not too long ago, and they was talking about the stats of black men being more sectioned than white. And we always have that conversation, but we've never really highlight a lot of progress has been made. It doesn't feel like it in a certain way, but trust me, I had aunties that would not even have a conversation about the word mental health, but now they like tell me like I'm not feeling. We just have conversations, and I can't believe what I'm hearing sometimes.
Absolutely. I think that, we have had so much progress in the past few years around the mental health sector and around the mental health world. And, when I first started, I was called all things in my class by peers, by why should you talk about mental health? You don't have mental health and all this kind of stuff. And now, even 4 years later, we are now being able to speak on national platforms about mental health. And I think that's really important. And, there is a huge pressure for young men specifically that, this shifting thing of, men don't cry or man up and phrases like that. Where do you think that pressure actually comes from? Where does that sort of originate from? Does anybody have any jump in first?
I was going to say, I think the conversations that we have around mental health, I think, are quite limited and quite narrow. And I think if you look at history, there's a great philosopher called George Santayana who said, those who do not understand history are condemned to repeat it. And I think it talks a lot about how in the world once upon a time ago, there were a substrata, so a really small proportion of men who were able to make the rules over everyone else. And we call that hegemonic masculinity. So these ideas that we all subscribe to. And as that came down in society, the same rules that applied at the top no longer applied everywhere else, but the effects were still just as damaging for the other tiers down the line. And I think what's really interesting around the conversations around mental health is some of it is good. Some of it, I think, has become quite trendy, negative for young men, funnily enough. And this is controversial, but I don't think it should be controversial. I believe in freedom of thought. And I think the freedom to think sometimes is the freedom to potentially offend people, even if we disagree with people. I think one of the biggest problems that we have now with mental health, and especially with young boys, is it's become an element of social contagion. So it's this idea now that people that have genuine mental health struggles, their struggles all get wrapped into this idea that it's just an overdiagnosis culture. It's just everyone feels like it's cool to be mentally unwell now. It's been absorbed so much into pop culture that it's devaluing what actual mental health is within itself. Those words have lost meaning. And I think for a lot of these young boys, the pressure for them to either speak in a way people understand or to act in the perfect kind of way has become this insurmountable odd that they're now facing on top of this idea that they weren't talking, so now they should talk. And I think people forget that cultural change takes a very long time to embed. The ideas that we have in the Western world about masculinity are completely different, for example, in the Caribbean. And I'd like to use an example. I like to cook, right? Cooking is my favorite thing. Whereas when I go to other cultures, men don't cook. And to me,
Yeah.
I feel that's not in my idea of what it means to be a man. I believe provision is not just financial. I believe provision is emotional, psychological safety, cooking. I think these things are all other types of forms of provision. So I think when we talk about masculinity, it's quite narrow-minded, and we don't think about the other ways that young boys should be allowed to be in the world, so to speak.
I think young, because I've been doing a lot of talks in schools from all ages as well, primary schools recently and secondary schools. One thing I've noticed is that with the younger generation, they're really affected by judgment and how other people's thoughts of them. And I get it because I'm 37. I've just got here now where like I'm starting not to care, or it doesn't affect me that much. But like, and look how long it's taken. So like, can you imagine for an average 15-year-old? Hearing people talking behind him in the classroom or pointing at him, or like they'll lose their minds over it. And I think those are where those kind of sayings get birthed, that man up. And because like, you know, you don't want to be seen looking like the weak one or the one that cries. I just put a song out called I Cry Sometimes. I don't know if anyone saw it, but I just shot this video for a song on my album, my last album called I Cry Sometimes, and the reception has been incredible. So it just shows that like how much people feel that way, but can't say they feel that way verbally. But if somebody shows them something that describes how they're feeling, they would like, you know, say that's how they feel, but they can't say it. But I just think for the younger generation, judgment is so heavy for them. It takes a lot to be able to like stand out and be yourself at that age. In that age group, then it's mainly group mentality about what the whole group or the friends think. You rarely get individuals like that. Individuals get really like shunned when you're that age. Like, why is he by himself? Why is he where you get called the weird one? It's only out of school that the weird one becomes cool. But while you're in school, being that individual and being that weird one, it's a very difficult and lonely path while you're in school.
Absolutely. Ben, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for me, it's interesting when we talk. We only ever seem to be when we talk about mental health. We only seem to talk about talking, and that's like one part of all of this. You know,
Exactly.
When things are too difficult for you to handle on your own, and it's starting to impact your day-to-day life, you're struggling to go to school. You don't want to potentially, you know, with suicidal thoughts. You may be thinking about maybe not wanting to be here anymore. That's talking is so important there, because there are people out there can help and take the weight off your shoulders and make things feel a bit more manageable. But the other conversation around this is that, you know, you feel emotions, things happen to you as a person, and you have in your toolbox ways of dealing with those day-to-day things. So if you're feeling, I don't know, you've got an exam coming up and you're feeling anxious and a bit sick and you're struggling to eat and sleep, you know, maybe what we can be doing there is going for a run or going and seeing friends or distracting yourself and dealing with those. That's in your toolbox, a tool you have to deal with that. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to talk about that. I mean, it might if it's really affecting you, but actually you have the tools to deal with that and make those symptoms feel less powerful. It's the same as if you're feeling sad. Maybe you've lost a pet or a family member, or you're going through grief. You know, yes, absolutely. If it's affecting your life, talk about it, because someone can help deal with that and help you feel a bit more in control. But before you get to that stage, you know, the reason we cry is because it processes the feeling of sadness. And so if you don't process the feeling of sadness, what happens to the sadness is it just stays there. So expressing those feelings through crying, or, you know, if you're really angry because someone's done something to you or something's happened that's made you angry, if you don't feel angry, the anger just sits there. So you've got to find a way of being angry in a safe way. So I do this. Like if someone's done something to me, or I've had something that's happened to me and I'm really angry with it, I love running. So I'll just go put on my trainers and I'll go to my park and I will literally just absolutely hammer 100 meters, and I will just put all this anger into running, and it will just let me release that feeling of anger. If I'm sad, or cry for a little bit, and you'll feel, and you can let go of those feelings. And so before we get to the stage of talking about mental health, we've got to also talk about the fact that you possess all the skills you need to deal with the things that happen to you in life. The only time really when we need to be talking about services and other people and talking to other people is when you need that extra little bit of help to go, hang on, I've tried all those things that I usually do, it hasn't worked. Can I get a bit of help with this? And so that's why I think maybe has gone a little bit wrong with the mental health conversation. We've gone straight to talk to someone else about your problems, which of course is so important, because people can help if things are out of control. But before that, you know, you have those tools, and no one really tells us what those tools are. And I think that's a step that we've missed. It's what Sam needed, it's what I needed. It's for someone to just go, anxiety, you know what to do. Sadness, you know what to do. Especially with men, when we're shamed away from crying, and with anger, we're not allowed to be angry because that's seen as dangerous or aggressive. But actually, anger is a pretty normal thing to feel. Just finding ways of safely doing it is really important. So that's what I'd say to people is like, you know what you're doing. You know what you need to do for these things. Just make sure you're actually doing it. And if you don't do it, if you don't process those emotions, then when you suddenly feel really upset or really angry, that's only because you haven't dealt with it along the way. So, what I'd say to people is, you know, we have all the tools we need, and talking is there, you know, when you need a bit of external help and you've not got as much control over that situation as you potentially need. But I don't think it's a shameful thing to still talk about having a bit of responsibility and having a bit of control over your own situation. That doesn't take away from the fact that we can also ask for help when we need it.
Absolutely. And I think for us as an organization, that's something that we really strongly value, is actually that thing of self-care. And that's something that, you know, early days #self-care was very much influenced as lying on but in reality, self-care is just looking after ourselves. And it is those things around, you know, going for a run, or for me, it's lying on the sofa, eating Ben & Jerry's and watching Netflix. Anything that works for you. And it is that first step of like, when you have had a rough day, when you are, you know, you've broken up with somebody, or an exam went badly, it's that kind of looking after yourself. And that could be running, that could be literally anything. And for us as an organization, that's what we try and do. We try and teach young people how to look after themselves. So I think that is one big thing that has been missed. We are in this mental health crisis as such that people keep calling, because young people don't understand what mental health is still, and they don't understand how to look after themselves. And if we actually bring up a generation which understand how they can support themselves, then hopefully there will be less burdens on support services, and there'll be less time on CAMHS waiting lists, because young people truly know how to support themselves before it gets too big. Yeah, that's a really important point, Ben, that you touched on. But yeah, so we've touched a little bit about the sort of the pressures on young people around sort of comparison, and obviously the dreaded one, social media. How do we think social media and online culture has impacted how boys see themselves? It is the dreaded question. Be courageous and go first.
Let me go first, because my whole operation is on social media. I'm sure all of ours is, but like, I've built everything that I'm doing off social media. And like, I'm telling you, like, if you go onto social media without a strong intention about what you're going on there to do, you can get lost. Before you know it, you're on this page that you don't even know how you got onto that page, or like, and it's for even dealing with comments. Obviously, because it's your page, majority of them will be positive. But I know how it feels when I see a negative comment out of the blue that I wasn't expecting. It's like you shut all the other positive comments that you got, and you just zoom in onto that one, and it plays on your head for the whole day. Like, you'll be walking around, and then randomly you'll be like, do you know what I mean? Right, she right though about my jacket. Do you know what I mean? And I'm a grown man, so it's like, I can't even imagine the effects it must have on the younger generation. Even when I go do these talks in schools, the first thing they say to me when I say I'm a rapper is, "Oh, sir, how much views have you got?" Have you got 1 million views? So can you imagine their conversations in the? We never had to deal with that. Well, Connor did because he was in school 3 years ago. But we never, we never had to deal with like, you know, how much views have you got? Can you imagine that conversation? Oh, you've only got 2,000 views, and then now that person's going to try and do any and anything to get views. And can you imagine what stupid things he might, you know, thoughts will come to his head to get views? So I feel like the time they're living in is like it's scary, to be fair, because everyone wants to go viral and they don't care if they go viral with integrity or if they just go viral for the sake of going viral. That's why you're seeing the most stupidest things, like someone getting a cup and banging it on. You know what I mean? They just see whatever. So yeah, I think social media is it's new, actually, to be fair, how this generation is dealing with it. That's my 2 cents on that, though.
Awesome. Sean or Ben, who wants to go next?
So if we're going to put this down into numbers, social media is a net negative than it is a net positive. Yes, there's positive parts to take out of it, but social media as a whole has actually far more negative effects. And you know, we talk a lot about doom scrolling, but in my head I now call it chain scrolling, because you know, like people would smoke quite a lot and they'll chain smoke over and over and over again, and before they know it, they've got to this threshold now where they have to keep going to get to this point to get the same high. That's what we're seeing a lot of now on social media, and we're living in a time where we have the attention economy. So companies are incentivized by how long they keep your eyes on something. That's how companies are now paid.
Yeah.
On top of that, you also have outrage, which is the idea that aggressive terms and violent terms are being rewarded on the internet. So if you type in, for example, certain reaction videos, it will be obliterated, eviscerated, violent. All these violent terms, we are reconditioning the way the brain works. And there's a great book by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation, where once upon a time ago, mental health and social media were correlated. Now the evidence has come back conclusive that mental health and social media is a cause for poor mental health. So anxiety and depression are on the rise. You've got comparison coming in there as well, the fear of judgment, and it's because it's accelerated. So I'm a bit of a nerd, so this is something I love to talk to kids about. But I say to kids, look, I'm very privileged, and I can absolutely acknowledge my position in this. I used to model, and I make the joke, I don't look like I model now because I enjoy food. I walked away from the industry with an eating disorder, for sure. And I compared myself so heavily to other people. I felt like, oh my God, I'm not doing as good as other people.
And how old was you?
So I was probably this is about 5 years ago. So I was about 26. I was still struggling with that. And I was modeling between the ages of 22 to 26. I had modeled for big brands like Uber, John Lewis, Peloton. And I'm actually going to go talk to a school later today about masculinity and talk about these things. And I love the idea that kids always think the grass is greener on the other side. They always think, what a social media presence, the grass is always greener.
Yeah.
But I always say to kids that not everything that glitters is gold. A lot of you want the you want the heights of fame, but are you ready to deal with the responsibilities that come with that fame? The pressure on you. Everywhere you go, people recognize you. So again, we all want what we think is good, essentially. And I often say to people that I got to the proverbial height of where I wanted to be, and I was gonna sign to a really big agency in New York, and then COVID came and it shut it all down. But I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I've often said that with social media, I lived up to everything that everybody wanted me to be. I could go to places and people recognized me. But when I lost it all, the gravy train came running down and nobody wanted to be my friend anymore. People were around me for the clout, the fame, and the success. And a lot of kids can't deal with that. And I think for all of us here, Shocker and Ben,
I've been through it. Well, everyone knows my journey anyway. That was how my first breakdown happened.
Literally.
So I can imagine a lot of people won't survive that. It takes a lot.
Absolutely. And it's typically the descent is far harder than the ascent to somewhere. And I've often said to kids, look, a lot of you want the fame, you want the success, but you're not ready for the responsibilities that come with it. And I think because of what kids are now being rewarded with, we grew up in the time where the internet was in its ascendancy, it was starting to grow, whereas kids now are growing up in the entirety of the internet and they're around more and more disruptive technology. So I actually feel sorry for kids now more than I ever have been. And I look back at my life and I think, oh, it was so good, I could go outside, and let's say I live next to Shocker or Ben, I could knock on your door. I'm like, boys, let's go outside. Like we had no phones, like we could go and live in the real world. And I think for a lot of kids, they live so much in the virtual world, and a lot of schools are also further cementing that. But I think with individuals like ourselves, we have the power and the privilege to be able to go into schools and say, look, we've got this platform. Let's try and use this responsibly, and let's try and use this ethically. That's the most important thing. So for me, social media is a net negative compared to it being a net positive.
Beautiful.
It's I think with social media and a lot of this conversation, it can very quickly become bad, and is bad, is a bad environment for so many people. But then on the flip side, I think when you take some responsibility and you can put in limits and you can do certain things to make that space a nice space,
It's
it
amazing.
can really be really good. I love my social
I love
media.
it. That's why I said if you go in there with
love
intention, I love it, Ben.
Yeah, so I agree with you, Sean, that it's a messy place, and if you don't go in with a plan, you can drown in it and get absorbed by these places, and you can form really unhealthy habits, and it can be a really awful place. But I love my social media. My social media is my job. It is my community. I've got, hundreds, thousands of people that I feel like I know, and it's a special place, and I've curated it to be my little corner of the internet that I love. But what comes with using social media, and it's the same when we're talking about gaming as well, what comes with those things is the responsibility of checking in at our own usage and making sure we're using it properly. And look, social media is not going anywhere. I don't see us doing what Australia's done, which is banning social media for under 16s. So I don't see that happening. So the only way of this situation getting better is for us to start looking at our own usage and treating social media a bit like a habit. So the more you use something as human beings, we sort of develop habits for that use. And so what we need to look at is actually, how do we stop ourselves developing those unhealthy habits? So on my phone, I've got time limiters. So if I hit I can't remember how many hours it is, but like 2 hours on Instagram in a day, then it flags up saying you've been on it for 2 hours. And usually that happens through a doom scroll. Or I like what you said about a chain scroll. It usually happens through that, and I'm like, whoa, okay, that's fine. I need to stop there. And I've blocked it from 9 p.m. So from 9 p.m. I can't go on it. So that's really helpful for me, because again, it stops me from, because if I didn't have that, I'd be lying in bed scrolling until about 1 a.m, and then I'd be shattered for work the next day. So it's I think what's really important is we just look at these things and we're like, am I enjoying it? Am I using it in a way that makes me feel good? If I'm not, what can I do differently? Can I put a time limiter on your settings? Can I unfollow people that I actually don't like? Or you don't even have to unfollow people. You can just mute their account, and they won't know that they're muted. So you just don't see their stuff. So you can still pretend to be friends with them. You just don't see any of their stuff. And you don't get their messages. So there are ways of making that environment a nice space. And when social media is good, it's a really good place. And it's the same with gaming. If you've got a good relationship with gaming, it's a really fun place where you can interact with your friends and you can have a good time. But it's just about taking a little bit of responsibility of going, is this working for me, or am I working for it? And you've got to make sure it's the first way around. It's a fun place and you're taking something out of it. Not letting social media and gaming and online platforms take over your life. So yeah, just to sort of have a look at those options. I think on my muted list, I think I've got 400 and something accounts that are muted. So I'm like a serial muter. I will mute, and they don't know. They think I'm following them and everything's great, but I don't see their stuff. And so it's like, do that and it becomes a really great place. And you can block search terms, you can block things from coming. A new feature on Instagram now is you can choose your algorithm. So I've put like interests that I don't get recommended on there, so I'm suddenly seeing loads of stuff about like stuff that I actually find interesting, rather than, I don't know, what's something that I'm not interested in. So yeah, make it your space and make it work for you, is what I'd say with social media and with gaming.
Agreed.
I think that's something that Sean?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's important to, like, I don't think we're gonna ever blame kids for their social media usage. And it's really important to put it out there that when social media was created, it was created for good. Like it was supposed to unite the world and bring us all under this global village. But behavioral psychologists were hired by social media companies to hack your attention span. And what people forget is that social media and phones in general have made you digitally available 24/7, and you are not supposed to be. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You're overwhelmed. So I think it's important just to put it out there
Yeah.
for kids and for schools.
I think that's a laugh from us all. But yeah, you know, I've experienced both the positives and negatives of social media. I was 14 when I started Spark and got thrown into the world of mental health advocacy at quite a young age. But the positives of that was I was a 14-year-old from North Devon, a very rural space with no opportunities, no contacts, nothing. And here I am 5 years later, leading one of the top mental health organizations in the country. You can do so much with it. But at the same time, during secondary school, and we just done this big thing for the One Show. And I remember we put this the video up from the One Show, and we got a series of comments from people in our local community that didn't like what we were doing. And started relentlessly trolling us for the space of about a year, which, you know, me, age 16, I didn't know what to do. I had school advising me not to leave the house alone. And that equally shows the impact that actually this can have, that social media is this incredible place that can give people so many opportunities. But at the same time, I've experienced the negatives around that of actually it gives these people power to be able to say whatever they want behind this anonymous screen. And I think it's really important to balance that. As Ben said, you can make social media yours. There are more and more features coming out now in which, as you said, the algorithm changes, which I've not experimented with yet, but I'm looking forward to experimenting with, because I say that you, to quite a large extent, can control how your social media kind of looks. Obviously, there will be anomalies a lot of the time. However, you can decide what accounts you follow, what accounts you unfollow, what accounts you like. So I've done this test many times on many burner Instagram accounts to see, and obviously the more cat memes I watch, typically the more cat videos that will come up. Whereas if I sit and watch a bunch of masculinity influencers, that's the stuff I'm going to get. And equally, it's really this adaptable of, you know, you will get anomalies and you will see stuff because you get drawn into this really deep fake video. And you're trying to work out if it's AI or not, then all of a sudden it thinks you like it. So it then shows you more of that. But as young people, it's really important to try and remember that you do have that power of what you follow, what you like, what you comment on, what you share with friends. And by doing that in a healthy way, that is how you sort of use social media to its advantage and to its sort of best capabilities. But yeah, as you've all touched on, limits, I think it's really important, trying to limit your time. And also, yeah, that availability. You don't have to respond to a Snapchat within 5 minutes. You can ignore people. You can leave undelivered for a few hours. As I know, being in school myself, it was like if somebody left you undelivered for an hour, you thought that they absolutely hated you and wanted nothing to do with you anymore. They were probably just, I don't know, having a bath. Like, you don't know what's going on in people's lives. And I think for young people, there can be that expectation all of a sudden that everybody has to respond to you instantly. And in reality, that's not the case. And I think, yeah, that's really, really important to remember. So, yeah, that's been amazing. And I think moving on, we are going to go to what do you think the biggest myth about masculinity is that harms young men today? I know we've touched on a few bits, but do you all sort of have sort of the biggest myth, you think?
I feel like Sean's ready.
Yeah.
Sean's ready.
You know, masculinity is not inherently bad. Masculinity has positives that have built the world today. And in that same breath, like any other ideology, political system, belief system, it has its flaws. And I often always end my sessions by saying there's more than one way to be a man and you get to choose your type of masculinity. Or I let young boys know the world doesn't need less of you. It needs just more of you with a different way to view things. And I think, for example, masculinity has all given us here the strength to move through our recoveries in our hardest times in our lives. Masculinity has given us the freedom to be able to connect with one another, to find solidarity within all of our journeys, although we're from different parts of the world. I think masculinity has built the world, but within that, as I say, there's rightful criticisms, but also helping boys is not a zero-sum game that negates the changes that young girls need as well. I believe those things are not mutually exclusive. And I find the conversation becomes an us versus them. It becomes, if we help boys, we take away from girls, or if we help girls, we take away from boys. But it's just so important to know that masculinity is needed, a healthier version of it is needed. And it's important to really look at that. So that's the one thing it's a big myth that I find so frustrating sometimes, that young boys are growing up with this belief that they're inherently wrong, and it's not what and it's not what we're saying. And I think the jobs we all do are to go in and let these boys know that you're still important, you're still needed. Let's just look at ways that we can have a bit more of a healthier relationship with who we want to be as men.
Yeah, I agree. And I also think the perception around masculinity, what a man should look like and how a man should talk and conduct themselves in society, is one of the biggest myths my whole life, because we only get pushed this same narrative of like a man has to be like muscular, and do you know what I mean, and he has to talk with a certain, just that same one narrative. And that's the beauty of social media now, that you get to see different, versions of how men are conducting themselves. And like, look at Connor, like Connor's not a big, masculine dude, but he still had the courage and like the ambition to come on here and set something like this up. Do you know what I mean? There's a lot of masculine males, like big, gym dudes, that can't set a group meeting like this up or even talk to their friends. So where's the muscles going to? So like, I feel like my perception of masculinity has changed so much. Some of my strongest friends are like, you'll be so surprised when you see them. They're not no big. Do you know what I mean? And they're the ones that's the most bold and most courageous, and like share their, I think. And we don't even talk about the balance between masculinity and feminine energy, both. Do you know what I mean? You can be too masculine and too feminine. You want to be right in the middle. You want to be able to go out with your girlfriend and laugh with her and be affectionate in public, and then you want to be able to like be around men as well and conduct yourself in the right way. So like, yeah, that's my piece on that.
It's funny, by the way, before you go on, Ben, one of the biggest things I've learned in my journey, and especially being in a relationship, is sometimes as a man, to lead doesn't always mean you lead with control. Sometimes you lead with different ways, right?
Yeah.
And the importance of feminine counsel as young boys and men is so important. And
exactly,
a lot of boys don't want to listen, a lot of men don't want to listen to women, but the importance of feminine counsel is so underrated.
100%.
I 100% agree with all this. So I think the biggest myth for me is that there's just two options, masculine or feminine, and that's it. I mean, I really don't understand. I've been a man 25 years. I don't really understand what masculinity means still. And I do sessions like this all the time when I'm talking about masculinity. If you ask me, if your question was what is masculinity, I'd probably be sitting there while the other two were answering, being like, I don't know what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
It's really hard to define, and that's why I think with this conversation, it's like, at the end of the day, you're a person. If you're a boy listening to this, you're a person that has been brought up in a society that basically splits people into women and men, right? And this isn't a conscious thing. People don't get brought up and treated like a boy because someone decided we're going to treat you like a boy. It's gone back through our whole history. And Sean mentioned earlier, great, it's like if we forget about history, we're doomed to repeat it. It's so true, because the thing is, with masculinity and femininity, these go back so far in our history. Our parents were taught this, our grandparents were taught this, our great grandparents were taught this, and it goes all the way back. So it now becomes so subconscious that, if we were going, and this is a really simplified example, but if I was to say masculinity is blue and femininity is pink,
exactly.
men don't hold hands, but girls do. And actually, when you go to India, men hold hands, right? And it's like, so if you actually take ourselves out of our culture and into another culture, they do things so differently. And suddenly, actually, masculinity is just something that we exist within, and that's a really difficult, complex thing to try and get our head around. But it just is sort of this societal, cultural thing that we've just invented and stuck with along the way. I think it's time that we sort of get rid of those two options and go, you are an individual person, you're a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and the beauty of life is you get to decide exactly which parts of what you want to be. So if you want to be a really strong leader, and you want to be really muscly and you want control, then there are roles for you in life that really you could do really well at. So you go into the armed forces or you go into sort of those sorts of roles and you could do really well at that. But don't forget that you're not just masculine, you've got bits of everything in you. So like you were saying, like be a bit vulnerable, and then you're going to have really good relationships with your girlfriend. Sometimes, because I've been brought up with very traditional masculine values. I mean, I wanted to go into the armed forces from a young age. I wanted to go into the army. I'm a runner. I've always been into exercise and all of that sort of stuff. But I'm romantic and I'm silly with my girlfriend, and I like, and you've got to let yourself be
And
that sometimes. And you
that's
can't
the balance I was
always.
talking about.
100% it's about balance. So my biggest misconception is that you're one or the other. There is one of the things you realize when you start doing work like this is there is far more that unites us, women and girls, or women and boys, old and young, black and white. There's so much more that brings us together than actually separates us. We're more the same than we are different. And so I think when it comes to masculinities, that's what I'd say is that no matter where you want to be on that spectrum, you've still got a little bit of the other. And don't forget that. And also, just to echo a point that was made earlier, this isn't an us versus them conversation. If we improve life for men and improve health outcomes for men and mental health for men, that doesn't take away from the rights of women. And in the same way, if we're talking about improving, violence against women and getting rid of that and improving opportunities for women, we're not inherently saying that men don't deserve those options either. Those two conversations can exist at the same time. And too often, I think masculinity, especially on social media, is painted as a women's rights are getting too much. Women are getting too much of a share of the pie. It's time for us to unite as men and take some back. And that's just, I've researched this. That's not what's happening at all. And actually, we can have a world where women get equality and get their fair share, whilst we also get a better quality of life for men as well. Those two things can happen. So anyone that tries to tell you differently is either misled or is trying to recruit you to a side, and that's not how it works in the real world.
Absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Everything you guys have just said. And as I said at the beginning of this session, that this year has been an interesting year with a lot going on, and obviously with the release of Adolescence and the talk in the media around social media influencers and this sort of phrase of toxic masculinity. Do we think that this year has had more positives or negative repercussions when it comes to being a man as such? Do we think it's had positives and shining light on what it's like? Or do we feel it's actually had more of a negative repercussion of showing the dangers?
I think there's a lot of shame around men at the moment. I think there's a lot of look, it's a fair point because there are issues with masculinity and there are problems that need to be solved and talked about. But I think sometimes the easiest way to pretend to fix a solution is just blame someone else for it. That's like the easiest option. And I think we've seen a lot this year of talk about the problems. And I work in a world where I spend a lot of time in meetings with people who just talk about problems and never talk about solutions. One of the easiest things to do in life is talk about problems. One of the hardest things to do is talk about solutions. And I do think this year, when it comes, not just this year, but generally with the conversation about male mental health and masculinity, there's a lot of talking about the problems and not a lot of talking about the solutions. And what we all need to realize, and what the media needs to realize, and what everyone should realize, is that no one is exempt from being part of the solution. It's the same with mental health. Like, a lot of people talk about mental health and go, we need better NHS services. I work in the NHS. I can tell you, if the NHS suddenly receives £100 billion tomorrow, it's not suddenly going to fix the mental health crisis, right? All of us play a role in doing that. So I think sometimes we all need to reflect that we can't just say we need to stop this happening or men need to be better at talking, and realize that when we're saying that, we're actually talking about what we can do about that. So instead of saying you need to be better, the question needs to be, what can I do to make this situation better? So, if you're, I don't know, a father, you can try and role model good good masculinity to your son. If you're a community leader, you can do the same. You can host conversations like this in your community. There are things we can do, and sometimes I think we just resort to, this is a problem, we're going to shame men into trying to change, which it's the easiest thing to do, is just talk about problems.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have too much to say on this one because I totally agree with Ben, and I also think also what you want to focus on, you'll see more of as well. If you want to focus on the positive work that's happening out there, you'll find it. There's so much incredible things happening. And if you want to focus on the negative work that's happening in these spaces, we'll find it too. That's why I'm saying we don't really highlight the progress that's being made. I'd never hear that. I never ever hear them saying, "Oh my God, this is amazing. This has just happened. The stats of this has gone up." Or like, it's always, highlighting the fact that, and I see the improvements. Trust me, I get the DMs from some of my supporters, even though it's very little, but I get the DMs saying, "Yo, I was in a crazy space, and I remember having this conversation with you," or and now 6 months later, or they'll pop up a year later where I've completely forgot about the conversation, and they'll just start thanking about something, and I'm like, "What's happening here?" And they'll be like, "That thing you said like a year ago, look what I'm doing now," and they'll show me, and I'm like, "This is what needs to get highlighted. People need to see more." Is it testimonies? That's the word. People need to see more testimonies. I used to think that's cringy, but I think I'm going to start doing that. I used to think it's cringy showing testimony, but I'm going to start doing it because it needs to get highlighted and people need to see it. But yeah, that's my take on that.
I think toxic masculinity has become a lazy buzzword, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's really important to really deconstruct that and to really focus on what that means. I think in the same breath, as Ben said, two truths can coexist at the same time. I think masculinity can be healthy, and at the same time it can have elements of toxicity. And I strongly believe, for example, I was massively inspired by Shocker's story when I first had my own mental breakdown. And I remember I reached out to Shocker and I was like, "Bro, you've inspired me a lot." And then obviously I've seen a lot of Ben's work. I'm inspired by a lot of the men around me and the kind of man that I want to be, most importantly. And I also believe the world where it is at the moment, I've often said it's like a referendum. It's a debate on what being a man means nowadays. And I think we're almost living in this crisis of meaning, and these social media influencers are filling this vacuum for a lot of these young boys. They're creating these simplistic answers for very complex issues in life. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of wider factors at play which have had an impact. That's a conversation for another day. But I think for the most part, it's become a lazy stereotype to just throw the term toxic masculinity. Let's focus on what makes these young boys positive. Are there certain traits we can really double down on? Are there other traits that we can really just rejig or try to change the way that we see it? So for me, I think it's been negative, but I think in the same breath it's been positive. But I think who we highlight has become a lot more negative. I think we've created almost this politics of reactivity. We're not active. Like, as Ben said, a lot of people talk about the problems, but they're not creating proper solutions. And the solutions are surface level solutions.
And what you said about who we highlight, that's why I screamed out yes, because that is extremely important.
Yeah.
Most of the things that we highlight in society are the negative figures. But if we was to highlight the incredible things that's going on, trust me when I say there will be a change. There will be. There will be. When I think about the reference points of who I wanted to be like when I was a young kid growing up and who I want to be like now, it's completely different. And I see the differences. Do you know what I mean? So that's another thing I always say in schools when I go. I say pick your reference points. It's extremely important. You can tell by what Sean was saying about the books he reads and what he's into, and you can hear it in his vocab, you can hear it in his language, the effect it's had on him, just by having those reference points. It will just already point you in that direction. So yeah, that's extremely important.
100%. It's funny because I wish I could rap like Shocker, but I'm a bit of a nerd. So I've often made the joke, and I say this as a joke. I often said, you put me in prison, and all I would do is read books. That's all I would do all day long. I love soaking up knowledge, and I think growing up as a young boy in where I grew up in Southwest London, it wasn't cool to be a nerd. It wasn't cool to be knowledgeable. It wasn't cool to want to know things. You had to almost feel like you were like someone who wasn't interested in that.
It's true.
And that's, again, as I got older, I started to celebrate when I go to schools and I talk to kids and they're like, "Sir, like, why do you enjoy it so much?" I'm like, because it gives me a chance to talk to you. I can talk to you about a range of things. Like, I don't
And you can go into any different world and have a conversation
Yeah,
with anyone. There's certain people that can only talk to a certain,
yeah. And I think
demographic.
I also enjoy martial arts. It's a beautiful form of fighting. Like I can do all these different things. I can cry to my girlfriend. I can cry. Like, do you know what I mean? So
That's
yeah,
what I was saying to you earlier. The last question when I say that is actually a man to me. Someone that can, express themselves in those different ways. Certain men are just is it one dimensional? That's the word. And like that's played out to me now.
Absolutely. Yeah, I echo again everything you guys have said, and I think it's so important to have those reference points, but equally to understand those reference points will change over time.
Yeah.
You know, I speak to people all the time. As a student, you're told, "Oh, you must plan out the rest of your life." Nobody. I go into educational conferences with hundreds of head teachers, and I say, "Put your hands up if you actually know what you want to do when you're older." Not a single teacher puts their hands up. So how are you supposed to know as well? And I think there's like huge pressure. But as we wrap up, this webinar has been part of our All-Star Advent campaign. And this year we've been asking famous faces to share a message to their younger selves. So I would love to throw it to you guys and just ask you for a message to your younger self. So
to my younger self. I thought it was to them. Oh, to my younger
to
self.
your younger self.
Jesus.
So if you have the one message that you would like to share with your younger self.
I would love to transport my song to my song Self-Love. You give everybody else love, but you never give yourself love. Don't forget about if I could transport that song to my younger self and say, listen to this on repeat and just meditate on those words and crack the self-love code and find a way to love yourself without anything. Because like what Sean said is something that we had to learn the hard way. We finally got there when his big modeling got taken away from him. My record deal got taken away from us, and we realized, oh my God, the identity that we built was completely false. It was just dependent on the fact that, like, we had these sponsorships and, these whatever was going on. They take that away and you realize there's actually nothing there. So, like, I would love to get my younger self to build on that foundation and, like, really, find a way to love and appreciate himself. So by the time he gets into the world and all of that stuff gets taken away from him, he'll be all right.
I love that. Brilliant. Who wants to go next?
I think I'd probably send myself Shocker's self-love song as well. Great song. It's a great song. No, I would say this is going to get deep, but I just enjoy it more. Like I think I spent my whole life wanting to be older and wanting to have like a job.
We all did. We all fell into that trap,
and
bro.
then you sit here now and I'm like I wish I'd not necessarily knew I was enjoying it, but just say yes to more things and just do more things and just have a bit more fun. And what you realize very quick, because this is going to sound so patronizing to people that are in school now, but what happens when you get older is you realize that actually things don't matter as much as they feel like they matter at school. And so you just say yes to more things and have more adventures and make more mistakes, because you get to when you're older, it's the mistakes that were really funny and like they're the stories you remember. So I just would have gone back and I would have been sillier and I would have done more stuff wrong. It's probably the wrong thing to say to people. But
it's true though. It's real. No, seriously.
Don't like feel like everything has to be perfect and curated, because actually like you get to here and you're like, all the best memories I have in my life are when things went wrong. And those are the best times. So and that's what I try and do now. It's like you just got to say yes to more things and just have a bit more fun whilst also looking after yourself. Don't burn out, but try and have a good time. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I agree.
Shawnee.
I don't know. I think sometimes I think about this and I think after my first heartbreak, I remember I cried in my room and I listened to the song "The Man Who Can't Be Moved" by The Script. I remember after that, I swore to God I'll never feel anything again. Like my heart, and I think that for me was like almost like this. It was also almost like my villain arc in life, where I would suppress how I felt all the time. And I think I would really look back and say to myself that it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be sensitive. And I'm really lucky to say that I had a best friend in my life who was like a father figure to me. Like I really looked up to him. When my father passed away, I was raised by a village of all women. And I think for years, I felt kind of ashamed about certain things. So for me, I would say to myself, don't allow that heartbreak to change who you are. And it's okay to, express who you are most important. And I think something else I'd really want to say to myself is, you know, don't pretend to be somebody you're not. I know that's cliched, but I think, again, growing up the way I grew up, you had to be a particular kind of way. You had to act a particular kind of way. And it just wasn't who it just wasn't who I was. I would go home and watch documentaries. I used to go home and read. Like, I looked up to people. Like, I didn't, like, so just, yeah, for me, it would have been like, be yourself. And probably like what Ben said, I'd ask Shocker to send me through his song from far away.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That was my only answer. I was like, I wish that song hit me then, because like I would probably would have never got it then either, but it would have planted the seed, because I always keep going back to it. Like, why would he give me this? What's in this? And I would have, do you know what I mean? You know, it happens to us all the time when you go back and watch. I think I went back and watched The Matrix, the first one, and I was like, oh,
yeah,
that's why he vomited when Neo pulled the. Do you know what I mean? I didn't get it before. I was like, you know, so it's like there's certain stuff you go back and it just clicks. So that song would have clicked for me. I would have said, "Oh, perfect."
I think that song basically it summarizes this whole webinar of just that our younger selves and that.
You give everybody else love, but you never give yourself love.
Exactly.
Don't forget about yourself. Ben's
we need to go out on that song. Someone can get it up.
It's going everywhere now. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. It's been an incredibly amazing conversation, and I hope that this really helps lots of young men and young people all. And yeah, you can head to sparkuk.co.uk to find out more, and we'll also add links to all of our amazing guests on there so you can check them out. But thank you very much for joining us, and we will see you soon.